Judith, Dr. Amado, thank you very much for joining me today. Today's theme of today's video, as you know, we've been doing a series of videos to celebrate and commemorate the 5 years of the Macular Degeneration Service that we've been running through from Amersham here at Buckinghamshire Healthcare Trust. Today's theme is going to be all about research. And when we started on this journey, when we set up the service 5 years ago, or more than 5 years ago now, but it's been running for 5 years, we wanted to make research integral to that service, as you know. And you've both been heavily involved. So Judith, you're our lead research nurse now in ophthalmology, but now you also look after other specialties as well as ophthalmology, but I think ophthalmology is obviously the most important one, obviously. And Dr. Amado, you joined us at the Trust coming with a huge wealth of research experience and knowledge from all fields and from your PhD and from elsewhere as well. And you've been also integral in terms of all the research that we've been doing with our macular degeneration patients.
I'll try to.
And Judith, just remind me, so how many research studies have we been involved in over the last 5 years, specifically for macular degeneration? I know we've been doing lots of research in ophthalmology generally, but specifically with macular degeneration, how many trials have we been involved in now, if you remember?
Around about 5 or 6, I would say. And when we started off, we were looking at the best way to monitor the non-affected eye to pick up the earliest changes.
That's right. That's absolutely right, and that's a really important question because a lot of our patients who come to us have wet macular degeneration in one eye, and we treat them for that. But many of them go on to get macular degeneration in the second eye, and the really important question that that particular study asked was, what's the best way of picking that up early so that we can treat and prevent them losing their eyesight in the second eye? And I think as part of, sort of as a follow-on from that study, there was another study that we were involved in that also looked at what's the best way of using the scans that we do in every single patient to try and predict how well or a patient's going to do with management. So that was, I think that's the study that's still ongoing, or is it nearly finished now?
No, I don't think it's been written up yet, but we've collected all the data.
And I think those were two of the early studies that we got involved in. And if you remember, we started off not having done any research in macular degeneration at all, and then we started off and it just, you know, our patients were so keen to be part of the research as well as all of our staff. And then we went on to do some bigger studies and
interventional studies.
That's right. So can you tell us a bit more about one or two of those?
Yeah, the main one that we've finished recruiting to recently was looking at a specific intervention that we're hoping will reduce the number of injections that are needed.
That's right, and that was a study that we did in conjunction with King's College, and actually there were centres that took part all across the country, as have many of our other studies. And that particular treatment was radiotherapy to the eye to see if it reduces the number of injections, and that's still ongoing, so we're looking forward to getting the results of that. And I think we've done a few studies we've been involved in which just look at real world and see, you know, when new drugs are introduced, there's lots of research that's done before the drug's introduced, but those treatments are done in very controlled environments. So in the real world, it's not quite the same. So we've been involved in studies as part of sort of national, but also international recruitment drives to look at what treatment is like in the real world.
Yes, and how different countries are, how often they're giving the injections and what kind of outcomes that gives the patients.
Absolutely. So now, Judith and Dr. Amado, I'm going to hand over to you guys to talk a little bit about some of the patient stories from the patients who've been involved in research. Perhaps you could sort of share with us, you know, some of the anxieties or some of the barriers to patients getting involved in research, but also perhaps, you know, what once patients are involved in research, how they then go on to whether they enjoy it or not, whether they feel it's worthwhile or beneficial or not. And then perhaps Dr. Amado, you could share with us some of the exciting new sort of research topics and subjects and that are coming up in the future, and perhaps some of the research that we might be getting involved in as a department. So I'll hand over to you both. Thank you very much.
So let's not forget that the research projects that we've been involved in have been built upon a lot of previous research project, and a lot of research was done on patients in terms of what they should do to prevent the progression of their macular degeneration. And of course, macular degeneration is dry or wet, and they always start with dry and then they can become wet. And a lot of the advice that we give patients today is based upon that research, which is, you know, wearing sunglasses, eating green leafy vegetables, oily fish, not smoking, doing exercise, and so on. So a lot of research has already been done, and we're building upon that. And I think patients find it even more reassuring when they know that we are still continuing this research.
Yeah, it's really nice actually to be able to offer closer monitoring, or maybe offer an intervention that's potentially beneficial not only to them but also moving forward.
Absolutely. And the research projects that we've done in this unit have helped elucidate whether we are doing exactly the right thing in terms of administering the treatment at certain weekly intervals, and how often the patients develop wet macular degeneration from dry macular degeneration, for example, in their fellow eye. And this is really very reassuring to the whole, you know, community of macular degeneration that research is ongoing. But a lot of the patients are asking about, well, how long am I going to have these injections for? Is there going to be an end to these 4 weekly injections that I've been having? And you have to give them some hope, so you can tell them about some of the research projects that are ongoing in the big treatment centres like in London and in the United States and internationally. So a very common question that I get from patients is, where are we with stem cell research? And I think with stem cell research, in order to understand that, we have to just talk a little bit about the anatomy of the eye. So if you imagine the eye like a traditional camera with the lens system at the front and the photographic film at the back, the photographic film has a dark backing layer to prevent reflection inside the photographic film. And very interestingly, the eye has a very similar thing called the retinal pigment epithelium, which is a backing layer for the retina that stops the scattering of the light inside the retina and helps improve the patient's vision. Interestingly, it is this very layer, the backing layer of the retina, the retinal pigment epithelium, that actually dies when people have a progression in their macular degeneration. So a lot of the stem cell research is now based upon trying to replace these lost retinal pigment epithelial cells. And interestingly enough, it's just a single layer of cells. It's not as complicated as the retina itself, for example. The retina itself is at least 9 different layers, and in one of the layers there's nearly 150,000 cells for every millimeter squared. So we're not going to be able to replace those yet. We're still focusing on the much easier single layer of cells, and that's what a lot of the major research centers around the world have been aiming to do. So because age-related macular degeneration primarily is a disease where these retinal pigment epithelial cells are lost, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to replace these cells, and that offers 2 problems. Where the first problem is, where are you going to get the cells from if you want to replace someone's retinal pigment epithelium? And the second question is, how are you going to deliver that? And a lot of different research centers have tried various cell sources. The most important 2 cell sources are embryonic stem cells, which are basically surplus in vitro fertilization cells that have been laid on a plastic dish. And interestingly, when you lay them on a plastic dish, they just want to grow forever. And one of the findings was that you can actually see retinal cells growing in that dish for some of the embryonic stem cells. So another source of cells that we can use to replace the retinal pigment epithelium is inducible progenitor stem cells, or IPS stem cells. And the brilliant thing about IPS stem cells is you can actually harvest them from the patient's own skin, and you just have to change exactly four genes in the DNA of that cell, and it can transform into a stem cell. So the nice thing about IPS is that you can actually harvest the cells from the patient themselves. So yes,
just on the skin surface.
Absolutely, yes. You just scratch some skin cells off, as long as they're viable and grow on a dish. You can actually target them with certain treatments that will change the four genes that need to be changed and transfer them into a stem cell. And once you have a group of stem cells growing from that patient, you can actually use them and replace the patient's own retinal pigment epithelium. So lots of promising research projects going on worldwide, and we have had success with both techniques in some patients worldwide, but obviously the patients who are with us in our unit are asking, when is this going to become available? And because stem cell research is in its infancy, we have to say it's going to be several years.
But still very, very promising.
Yes.
Definitely something for the future.
Yes, absolutely. Another avenue of research is to do with the machinery that we use to capture the images. So one of the machines that we use to diagnose wet versus dry macular degeneration is called an optical coherence tomography machine, or OCT machine, and research is ongoing in that field as well. So initially there was the time domain OCT machine, then we had the spectral domain OCT machine, then we now have the sweat source OCT machine, and who knows what the future will offer for us.
I think there's also some research being done, and it's certainly something we're looking at doing, into the psychological effects of AMD and vision loss as well. So that's an area that we're looking to set our own study up in. So hopefully that will be coming to the unit in the next year or so.
So what is the psychological effect that you're aware of that happens in certain patients that you'll be looking for?
So what we're going to look at is the effects of continuing the face-to-face appointments during COVID, and we're going to try and see how the patients found that in terms of their anxieties coming to a hospital during COVID versus their anxieties about their eyesight. And did they actually prefer to come to see us face-to-face? Because I think quite a lot of units during the height of COVID did remote consultations for AMD patients.
Interesting.
So that's an area we're looking at to explore a bit further.
Another avenue of research is how to deliver these retinal pigment epithelial cells underneath the retina, because unfortunately the place that we have to deliver the cells is very tricky to access. So at the moment only a vitreoretinal surgeon can place the cells underneath the retina. So you have to have the cells either in a suspension, in which case a VR surgeon can inject the cells under the retina, or you can mount the cells onto a very thin sheet of polymer, and the surgeon can then make a small cut in the retina, a small detachment, and then post a patch, a so-called patch of cells which are living on a polymer directly beneath the retina.
Okay. So is the hardest part of the whole procedure actually getting them to be accepted by the body?
Fortunately, the eye has something we call immune privilege, so it tolerates better than a lot of the other places in our body. It tolerates foreign bodies more, it tolerates foreign cells more. So obviously, if you're talking about embryonic stem cells, then you will have to have some form of immune suppression, even if it's a localized immune suppression, with a steroid injection or steroid eye drops. But with the IPS cells, because you harvested the cells from the patient themselves, you don't have to give them any immune suppression. Another avenue of research is, and this is something I get asked from patients about, is there ever going to be an alternative to injection? So are they ever going to have a longer lasting injection? And very recently the NHS has now approved the use of a longer acting injection, so there is some light at the end of the tunnel for those patients who feel that, you know, their monthly injections are never ending, and hopefully for some of these patients we'll be able to inject them every 3 months or every 2 months rather than every month. Another question I get asked a lot is, can eye drops be used instead of injections in the future? And there is a group who are actually in the UK who have actually tested some eye drops on in macular degeneration in animals, and it seemed to have worked. So there is hope for patients as well in the far future, because there's no sign of the eye drop being marketed yet. So there is hope that in the future we may be able to give them something other than an injection.
That would be fantastic.
Yes. So basically, a lot of these clinical trials that are happening nationwide and even internationally, we get our fair share of the research, and we are asked by these national or international research centres to take part in the research as well. So if you're a patient and you'd like to take part in our research, please talk to your doctor and tell them that you're willing to take part, and we will make sure that you're recruited into any ongoing clinical trials at our unit.